Every project needs a budget, but you're a project manager, not an accountant. Most project managers find the process of creating their first project budget somewhat daunting. So here then is my process for creating a project budget. We're going to look at 3 processes for creating a project budget, and the first is based on the way that you would create an operational budget. It is perhaps the simplest of these approaches and lends itself well to a template approach. What I mean by this is that we start with a list of cost centers or heads of expenditure, and then we fill in the individual costs within each. Number 1, activity or cost center budgeting. This is a simple approach that works well in 3 main circumstances. Monthly budgets for a long-running project. That is a quasi-operational sort of budget. A basic budget for a simple project, where detail and rigour are not your top priority. An outline or indicative budget for a larger project, perhaps for an early stage of an outline business case. This would be a first-pass budget that would feed into a later, more rigorous budget. The way that we create this is we start with a series of headings for all the main areas of project expenditure that we anticipate. Things like equipment, personnel, rentals and leases, materials, licenses, those sorts of things. Perhaps you might have consultancy fees or other professional fees like lawyers or architects. Once you've got down the headings for those, you can put estimates against each one. For some of these headings, there will be a range of different expenses that you might anticipate. It's very easy to build a template for this and to adapt it to each different project. This is not a rigorous approach, but it does work well, particularly for simple projects. Number 2, the work breakdown structure approach. This, on the other hand, is the most rigorous, most robust and most reliable approach for creating a project budget. If your project is important and it's important to you to have a rigorous budget, then start with your work breakdown structure. From that, you will create a cost breakdown structure. Simply put, you will allocate costs to each item in your work breakdown structure to build up a budget. The first step in the process is scoping. Determine what your project will do and create in scope items, and also what your project will not do and will not create, the exclusions from scope. And then get that statement signed off. Step 2, create your work breakdown structure. From your scope statement, develop a full work breakdown structure. I'm not going to go into how to do that here because we have a full video on how to create a work breakdown structure, and I'll put a link to it in the description. Step 3, estimate costs to create a cost breakdown structure, or CBS. For each element of the bottom tier of your work breakdown structure, make an estimate for all of the costs involved in either doing that work or creating that product. This includes the time and the cost of the work that people are doing, the cost of materials or consumables they might be using, and the costs of assets or equipment that they also need to use. This might include things like licensing. In doing this, you may need to combine unit costs like cost per hour of consultants or cost per item of consumables with estimates of how much you're going to need. So this is very closely related to the process of schedule estimating, because if you need to know how many hours someone is going to work for your schedule, you're also going to need that for your cost estimate too. Once again, I have a video this time about estimating project costs, and again, I'll put a link to it in the description. Step 4 is to aggregate your costs into a project budget. Now that you have a full cost breakdown structure, you can take all of the costs that you've estimated and draw them together into your budget. Conveniently, because you've based your cost breakdown structure on a work breakdown structure, when you import this to create a budget, it will be structured in a highly logical way. Broadly, there are two approaches for how you're going to be doing this. The first will be if you have some form of highly integrated project management software or project management information system available to you. If this is the case, then chances are it's just a flick of a switch, a press of a button, because you'll have entered all of the data and the software will have a way of taking it from the work breakdown structure format into a consolidated project budget. It's also worth knowing that many ERP, enterprise resource planning software tools like Oracle or SAP, also have project budgeting modules which work from a work or cost breakdown structure approach. However, the second approach is if you are relying on simpler tools. In this case, frankly, a spreadsheet is your best friend here. Starting with your work breakdown structure dictionary, which should now have costs allocated to each item in it, you can then convert those into a spreadsheet. Indeed, many people create their work breakdown structure dictionary using a spreadsheet, so you're already likely to be there. You just need to do some formatting and laying out to make sure you can consolidate all of this into a project budget. RACI chart approach or linear responsibility chart approach. The terms RACI chart and linear responsibility chart have converged. There was a time when they referred to two slightly different but consistent tools. Nowadays, most people refer to what I learned to call a linear responsibility chart as a RACI chart, and I don't need to go into the details of this. Suffice to say, I already have a video on describing how to create a RACI chart. Yes, I'll put a link in the description. We use RACI charts as the basis for creating project budgets, particularly for simpler projects, and also for projects where the primary set of costs are connected to people's time, the cost of your resources. Yes, you can use RACI charts for project budgets where there are other resources aside from people's time, but typically it's organisations like consultancies and professional services firms that use RACI charts for budgeting. Another good reason for using a RACI chart is it's extremely flexible in the level of detail that you apply. You can use RACI charts for budgeting at the level of major components of the projects like work streams, or down to smaller work packages, or if you choose, down to the detail of individual activities or tasks. The outcome will be a simple table with the tasks, work packages or work streams down the side and a list of all of the resources across the top. At the intersections of that table will be the cost estimates for applying each resource to each task, work package or work stream. Step 1 is to build your RACI chart or linear responsibility chart format. Draw a grid, and a spreadsheet is ideal for this. Down the vertical axis, list all of the tasks at the level of detail that interests you, either the individual task level or clustering them up into work packages or even into work streams. Across the horizontal axis, list all of the resources that are going to go into that project. Typically, I start with the human resources, the people, at the left of the chart, and then at the far right, that's where I'll put the materials, the consumables, and then the equipment and the assets. It doesn't matter how you lay it out, but it is a good idea to find a format that works for you and to stick to it. You can also do nice things like color coding or formatting it so that it is easy to read and easy to find what people are interested in. So if step 1 is to put all the tasks down the side and step 2 is to put all of the resources along the top, the next thing we need to do is under each resource, put the unit cost. For people, this may be an hourly rate or a daily rate. For consumables, it may be a per item or a volume rate. And for equipment, it may be a purchase rate or a hire rate or some other rate that allows you to calculate the cost. Finally, in the intersections, make estimates of the resource utilization. How many hours or how many days of each person's time is needed for each task, each activity, each work package? How many units of material or consumable do you need? How much time do you need to use from equipment and assets? Using the spreadsheet, a second cell can be used, therefore, to multiply the unit cost with the number of units to provide the cost estimate for that resource in that task. Because you've built it on a spreadsheet, it is then very easy to calculate the totals. The total cost for each person, the total cost for each resource or material, and indeed you can also calculate the totals across the chart to calculate the cost of each activity or work stream or work package. And of course, down at the bottom right, there can be a grand total, the whole cost for the project. Whichever of these three approaches you use, there are a couple of additional things to bear in mind. The first of these is whole project costs. There are often going to be some costs which apply to the whole project. They don't easily divide up amongst the resources or amongst the tasks or the work streams or the heads of expenditure. These are things like project management time, licenses for software that you need, or rental of accommodation for your project team. Maybe there will be insurances or financing costs like interest or exchange rates. Now, if you use the work breakdown structure approach, or any of these approaches really, I do favour having a heading for project management so that you include all of the project management costs in your base model. But any costs that you didn't include, any other whole project costs, need to get added on at the end. Whether you choose to allocate them to the different activities or work streams is up to you. My advice is it's probably not worth doing it because there's a whole load of heartache about deciding how to allocate them for very little real benefit. But in some organisations, it will be necessary. The second thing to consider is contingency, because things will go wrong. And if you don't have any contingency in your budget, then the first thing that goes wrong will cause you to go over budget. There are broadly 4 approaches to creating project contingency budget. And the first and simplest is to add one big chunk of contingency cash to the whole project. This is usually a simple figure, either one number of dollars or pounds or euro or yen or whatever your currency is, or more typically, a simple percentage applied to the whole project budget. The only times you're likely to use this approach, however, is with smaller, simpler projects. It has the merit of simplicity, but it is rather crude. Next is the simplest approach that really makes sense in anything but the smallest project, which is to do the same at a single contingency sum, but to each work stream. Each work stream is likely to have a different characteristic. It's going to involve perhaps different balances of different resources and have significantly different risks, so it makes sense to allocate a different percentage of contingency to each work stream in principle. Think about the different things that can go wrong for each work stream and also the confidence you have around the base estimates that you've used. So, while one work stream may have a contingency as low as 10%, another might need a contingency as high as 40 or 50% on the budget. The third approach, at the opposite extreme, is to add contingency to every single cost you estimate. If you think in terms of the work breakdown structure approach, this is taking every item at the bottom of the work breakdown structure and not just estimating a cost, but estimating a contingency on that cost, and then carrying that up through the work breakdown structure into your full budget. This has the merit, of course, of precision. But precision is not the same as accuracy. It creates an awful lot of work and may not produce a better result than a simpler approach. So the fourth approach is what one might call a common sense balanced approach. To decide where in the hierarchy of your work breakdown structure is the right place to apply contingency. Typically, this is where you can expect to see significant differences in either your understanding of the project, or the novelty of what you're doing, or the risk that you can expect from that set of activities. Estimate your contingency here and then carry it up to workstream level, or indeed, finally, to the project level. So there we have 3 different ways that you can create a project budget, and the 2 important things you need to make sure you add on to every budget. Project budgeting is not intuitive to many new project managers, but it is also not difficult in concept. The challenge, of course, is not putting together the budget, but making reliable estimates, which means understanding your project in depth. But the good news is, that is our core competence as project managers. Please do give this video a like if you've enjoyed it or learned from it. I'll be creating loads more great project management videos for you, so please do subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of them. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.